My name is Ethan Carter, and I never imagined my life would take the turns it eventually did. If you had asked me a few years ago what I wanted out of life, I would have given you the simplest of answers: peace, stability, and a place to call my own. No grand ambitions to conquer the world, no desperate need for recognition, just a quiet life built on hard work and honesty. And for a while, I thought I had exactly that. I lived in Seattle, Washington, in a modest condo in Bellevue. It wasn't glamorous, not by any stretch, but it was mine. Every inch of that place carried the weight of my sacrifices. I had spent 10 years working as an attorney at a small, respectable law firm, stashing away every paycheck, cutting corners, refusing indulgences, just so I could afford that sanctuary. While others my age splurged on the latest cars or flashy gadgets, I drove the same old hatchback I'd bought straight out of law school. Its paint was chipped, the interior smelled faintly of coffee and late-night fast food, but it carried me faithfully through every season. That condo became more than a roof over my head, it was a symbol. A testament that perseverance, no matter how quiet, pays off. And every time I turned the key to step inside, I felt something rare: pride. But pride was never something I found easily in my family. My father, Michael Carter, was a stern man. At 65, his hands still bore the hardened calluses of decades spent repairing engines in a dimly lit auto shop. He wasn't a bad man, but he was demanding, sharp-tongued, and relentless in his expectations. Growing up under his shadow, I always felt like I was being measured against an invisible yardstick, one I never seemed tall enough to meet. Then there was my brother, Dylan. 5 years younger than me, Dylan was the golden child. He had charm that could fill a room, a smile that disarmed suspicion, and an air of confidence that fooled nearly everyone around him. My father adored him. My mother, Patricia, though more gentle, also gravitated toward Dylan's energy. Where my diligence was seen as boring, Dylan's recklessness was romanticized. Where my steady paycheck was considered safe, Dylan's endless promises of success were treated like glimpses of destiny. The truth was, Dylan had no job. Not a real one, anyway. He dressed in designer clothes, wore the latest smartwatch, and posted photos on social media that painted a picture of luxury: cocktail parties, beachfront getaways, high-rise apartments with glittering skylines. But if you scratched beneath the surface, it was all smoke and mirrors. He was jobless, drifting from one supposed venture to another, always talking about investors lining up or opportunities just around the corner. And yet, despite the hollowness of it all, my parents treated him like a visionary, and me? I was the dependable one. The one who never needed rescuing, never caused a scene. In their eyes, that made me less remarkable. It didn't matter that I paid my bills on time, that I built a life brick by brick, or that I stayed true to my word. Dependability, it seemed, wasn't glamorous. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. Deep down, I longed for just a nod of approval, a moment where my father would look at me with the same pride he reserved for Dylan. That moment never came. Things took a sharp turn when my parents' living situation began to deteriorate. They'd been renting a small, worn-down house on the outskirts of Seattle. Mold crept along the bathroom tiles, the roof leaked whenever it rained, and the rent was steadily draining their limited income. My father's retirement savings were sparse, my mother's health was declining with arthritis and aching joints. The burden was becoming too much for them. I couldn't watch them struggle like that. Despite the years of favoritism, despite my own bruised feelings, they were my parents. I owed them care. So I offered a solution: why don't you move in with me? I suggested one evening over dinner. My mother's eyes softened immediately, relief washing over her face. My father frowned, as if reluctant to admit they needed help, but he didn't refuse. Within weeks, they packed up their lives and moved into my condo. I cleared out the master bedroom for them, shifting myself into the smaller guest room. I bought a new couch, a large television for my father's sports shows, even made sure the kitchen was stocked with the foods they liked best. It felt like a new chapter, one where we could heal old wounds and grow closer as a family. At least, that's what I hoped. The reality was different. My expenses skyrocketed almost overnight. Groceries, utilities, medications, repairs, everything fell squarely on my shoulders. My father's pension barely covered his personal needs, and my mother's modest savings disappeared into medical bills. I told myself I didn't mind. This was family. This was duty. But as the weeks passed, something began to gnaw at me. The silence. I came home every evening, exhausted from long hours at the firm, carrying bags of groceries or takeout so they wouldn't have to cook. I expected, if not gratitude, then at least acknowledgement. Instead, I was met with nods, half-hearted comments, or complaints. The sink's dripping again. The Wi-Fi's too slow. These groceries don't taste the same as what your mother used to buy. My mother would murmur a quiet thank you here and there, but it was fleeting, swallowed by the noise of my father's grumblings. It felt less like I had invited them into my sanctuary and more like I had handed over my life. And then Dylan began to appear. At first, it was once a week. Then twice. Soon, he was practically living in my condo without ever asking. He'd waltz in with that effortless grin, toss his coat on the couch, and raid the fridge like he owned the place. He'd spin stories of his latest ventures, dazzling my parents with tales of investors, big deals, and luxury just on the horizon. Just need a little seed money to get things rolling, he'd say, flashing that smile. And my parents? They hung on his every word. I saw the gleam in my father's eyes, the way my mother leaned forward, soaking in every promise. To them, Dylan wasn't just their son, he was their ticket to glory. The first time I caught my mother slipping Dylan cash from the household budget, I confronted her. "Mom, what are you doing?" That money was for groceries. Her cheeks flushed, and she avoided my eyes. "It's just a small loan. Dylan will pay it back." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but the sound caught in my throat. Pay it back? Dylan never paid anything back. When I pressed further, my father intervened. "Don't be petty, Ethan. Your brother has vision. Unlike you, stuck in some 9-to-5 grind. You should be proud he's aiming higher." I stood there, stunned. My sacrifices meant nothing. My steady career, my condo, the very roof over their heads, it was all invisible to them. Meanwhile, Dylan's fantasies were treated like gospel. The resentment began to build, slow and suffocating. I tried to ignore it, tried to bury it beneath a smile, but the cracks were widening. The breaking point came one evening at dinner. I had just shared a small victory at work, a case I'd won for a client that week. It wasn't earth-shattering, but it mattered to me. Before I could even finish, my father cut in. "Ethan, your brother has an idea. He just needs some capital. $120,000. That's nothing for you, with your steady job. Think of it as an investment in family." I nearly dropped my fork. "What? Dad, I don't have that kind of money to throw around. And even if I did, I wouldn't gamble it on one of Dylan's pipe dreams." The room went silent. My father's face hardened, his jaw tightening. "Don't be selfish. You've got that condo. You could remortgage it. Isn't family worth more than money?" My mother nodded softly, almost apologetically, her eyes pleading with me to agree. Dylan, of course, leaned back with a smug smile, as if victory was already his.
After that night, I disappeared. No phone calls. No explanations. Just me, a newborn, and a car that barely ran. I drove through the dark until the lights of Brentwood faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the quiet hum of Knoxville's streets. I found a small one-bedroom house on the city's edge, nothing fancy, but safe. That became our home. I named him Aiden, meaning little fire. It suited him perfectly. He was small, fragile, yet alive with quiet strength. The first nights were the hardest. I knew nothing about caring for an infant. I burned bottles, fumbled with diapers, and learned how to sleep in 15-minute intervals. My video equipment gathered dust in the corner while I learned how to be both father and mother, but every time Aiden smiled, the exhaustion vanished. His laughter filled the silence I'd lived with all my life. It was as if Sophia's soul had returned through him. The same bright eyes, the same spark of curiosity. Whenever he reached for my face, I felt a promise forming, a promise to raise him in love, not fear. I built my freelance work back up slowly, filming weddings, small documentaries, and city events. Every extra dollar went into savings for Aiden's future. We didn't have luxury, but we had peace. In the evenings, I'd take him for walks through a nearby park, pointing at the stars. "Your mom used to dream about seeing the world," I'd whisper. "And one day, you will too." Years passed, and Aiden grew into a curious, artistic boy. By the time he turned 10, he was sculpting with the same natural grace Sophia once had. While other kids played video games, he sat by the window molding tiny figures from clay. His hands moved with purpose, his eyes bright with imagination. One day, he handed me a sculpture of an apple tree, our family's orchard, complete with two small figures sitting beneath it. "It's us," he said proudly. My throat tightened as I smiled. When Aiden was 12, I enrolled him in a statewide art competition. His piece, titled Orchard Twilight, was breathtaking, a clay sculpture of a child sitting under an apple tree, reaching toward the light. It won first prize. Reporters took photos, and his story was printed in local papers. The headline read, "Knoxville Prodigy Brings Heart to Art." I didn't think much of it until my phone rang one evening. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was unmistakable, "Ethan." It was my mother. Her tone trembled. "I saw the paper, that boy, he looks so much like," she stopped herself. "Who is he?" I hesitated before answering. "He's my son," I said quietly. There was a long pause. "Ethan, may I see him?" A week later, I drove to Brentwood for the first time in over a decade. The mansion looked smaller than I remembered, less like a fortress, more like a relic of a world that no longer mattered. My father opened the door. Time had not been kind to him. His once commanding presence had softened into weariness. My mother stood behind him, her eyes glassy with tears. When Aiden stepped forward shyly, my mother gasped. Her hands trembled as she reached out, but stopped short, afraid to scare him. "You have your mother's eyes," she whispered. Aiden smiled politely, unaware of the history between them. We sat together in the same dining room where our family had once lived in silence. The same chandelier still hung above, but the air felt different, fragile, uncertain. My father's eyes lingered on Aiden, full of questions he didn't dare ask. When Aiden went outside to play in the garden, I took out an envelope and placed it on the table. Inside were Sophia's medical papers, a birth record, and a photo of her holding her newborn son. My father picked up the picture with trembling hands. His voice cracked. "This is Sophia's child." "Yes," I said quietly. "Your grandson." He stared at me in disbelief, tears forming in his eyes. "But the clinic said." "I know what they said," I interrupted softly. "You told them to handle it." "But I found him. I found him by the stream, fighting to live." Silence fell. My mother began to cry, deep, broken sobs that shook her whole body. My father pressed a hand to his face, whispering words I thought I'd never hear. I was wrong, he said hoarsely. Dear God, I was so wrong. For the first time in my life, I saw my father not as the unshakable patriarch of the Caldwells, but as a man, flawed, frightened, and full of regret. My mother reached across the table, taking my hand. Thank you for saving him, she whispered. And for giving Sophia's love another chance. From that day forward, something began to heal. My parents withdrew from their social circles and focused on rebuilding the family they had almost destroyed. My father funded art programs for underprivileged children, while my mother reopened Sophia's old studio and spent her afternoons teaching Aiden how to sculpt. When I visited, I often found them laughing together. My mother covered in clay dust, Aiden proudly showing off his new creations, and my father sitting quietly in the corner, watching with tears in his eyes. For the first time, our family felt real, not perfect, not polished, but honest. One spring afternoon, I brought my camera to capture them in the orchard. My father was telling Aiden stories about his youth, my mother was shaping clay figures beside them, and sunlight streamed through the trees like golden threads. I pressed record, my heart full. It was the moment I'd waited for my entire life, the moment when love finally replaced silence. Years later, I wrote everything down, the truth of our family, the lies, the redemption. I called it The Orchard Promise. I didn't write it for revenge or pity, but for understanding. I wanted Aiden to know where he came from, and how love, real love, can survive even the darkest choices. When Aiden was old enough to read it, he closed the book and hugged me tightly. Thank you, he whispered. For saving me. For saving Mom. For saving all of us. I looked at him, his mother's spirit shining in his eyes, and realized something profound. We spend so much of our lives chasing perfection, titles, wealth, approval, forgetting that what truly matters are the quiet moments of kindness, the courage to forgive, and the grace to begin again. Now, whenever I visit Brentwood, the mansion no longer feels cold. My father plants apple trees every spring in Sophia's memory, and my mother's laughter echoes through the halls. Aiden's sculptures line the entryway, simple, beautiful reminders of what love can rebuild. Under the same orchard where Sophia and I once dreamed of freedom, I often sit with my parents and Aiden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold. My father tells stories, my mother smiles softly, and Aiden sketches in his notebook. I hold my camera, capturing every second, because I know now that these moments are everything.